Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of What's the Point? And my guest today is Colleen Doyle Bryant, and I'm really excited because, simply put, she's an expert on common decency. Hello, Colleen.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for your time, and I look very much forward to our conversation. So being an expert in common decency, I would submit that a lot of the listeners are going to say, well, yeah, we could use some of that right about now. That said, I know this isn't something that you've just gotten into. Share with us a little bit about how you've become the common decency expert that you are.
Great. Well, this started some time ago when my children were young, and I realized the way they were learning about making good choices at school didn't quite make sense to me. This was in the age of the self-esteem revolution, and there was a lot of focus on being nice for the wrong reasons, because there was a reward in it, or because you were worried about getting in trouble. But there seemed to be this lack of doing the right thing because it felt good to do the right thing. So about 20 years ago, I took it upon myself to start teaching my kids, how do you understand the ways people interact with each other, and how do you do something because it's good for them and it's good for you. So after experimenting on my kids for about a decade, I had some good ways of talking about things like honesty and respect and responsibility, and came to realize there are lots of other parents who are dealing with the same sort of situation. They wanted their children to learn the value of good values, but maybe didn't have the words. So I started writing books first for young children and teaching resources. And then as my children aged and their problems changed, I started writing for teenagers. And so my books and curriculum resources are used around the world for high school and elementary school. But then I started looking around in the last number of years and realized, for all that we adults teach our children to be good people, we weren't really exemplifying those same behaviors. What happened to honesty and respect and responsibility? So I started doing some research, and I said, what happened? What changed? And the more I looked into it, the more brilliant little insights I found from various fields, from biology, psychology, sociology, philosophy, ancient and modern. And as I would mention them to people, I would say, hey, did you know? They would respond so positively to say, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Now, if we understand what's wrong, maybe we can figure out how to move forward out of this phase that we're in. So I wrote a book on that. That one is called Rooted in Decency, and it's geared more towards an adult audience.
Well, that's terrific. So let me go ahead and say now that Colleen is the author of 5 books, and she's mentioned a few of them. There's Rooted in Decency, which is the most recent publication. There's a series called Talking with Trees that I'll ask you to expand on a little bit. And then there's Truth Be Told Quotes, which I look very much forward to reading myself. All of these books, how you can find them will be in the show notes, but I'm sure that there are going to be resources that you're going to be interested in after we have Colleen share a little bit more about them. So, your books have sold hundreds of thousands of copies. I think that underscores the interest in good values and common decency.
In the interest of integrity, I should clarify the teaching resources are downloaded. Hundreds of thousands of teaching resources are downloaded. The books themselves sell less, partly because I give a lot of the books away for free to help teachers. So it's the teaching resources have that sort of magnitude.
Okay. Well, the message is getting out there, I think, is the point. But I do appreciate your transparency and your honesty, which starts to speak to one of the tenets, I suspect, of the common decency. Now, you are a sociology graduate from Duke University.
That's right.
And tell me about that. What got you to Duke? I know you live now in the Northwest, but tell me about your experience at Duke and the Blue Devils and your choice of sociology.
Well, I went to Duke planning to be a doctor. And much to my parents' shock and surprise, as I started studying, Duke is a liberal arts school, so you take a breadth of courses. And I found the study of people and the way that individuals can think in common ways and come together as groups in these relationships that help us in our mutual well-being. I just thought it was fascinating. And the more I studied, the more I loved it. And I ended up going into marketing instead of medicine because marketing is a practical application of sociology. And then over time, as I had kids and I left the corporate world to focus more on kids, and our family moved to China, so I kind of had to redirect my life. Then this interest in moral decision making and social relationships became more important to me. I focused in that area.
Well, there's a lot to unpack from that sentence right there, Colleen. Let's start with share with us your corporate journey.
Well, I started out in marketing and advertising, mostly for technical products. I happen to have a technical aptitude, and so I would work on, professional landscaping products and computers and, various technological products. And that led me to work for Intel. So I got hired on to do marketing for Intel, and there I did product management and writing and product deployments. And then we had the opportunity for our family to move to China for my husband's position, which meant I needed to leave, the corporate world and reinvent what it was to be a family living in an international community. And that was absolutely fantastic.
Well, in and of itself, that sounds fascinating. It sounds challenging. It sounds probably to me that there would be some fear involved, but some tremendous opportunity. So without necessarily getting into what your husband is doing, unless you choose to, going to China, your family then, how many children, what age? That must have been both an exciting and trepidatious time.
It was. And in fact, I went to China sight unseen. I had never been there. My husband had been, but I hadn't. And so we had this choice to make. We both loved the idea of going overseas. We have 4 children. The oldest 2 are my stepchildren. And we decided with their mother that it was better for them to stay in the home base they knew here in the US. And our 2 younger children, which we had together, they came with us to China. And they went to an international school. They had friends from all over the world, Africa, Australia, Asia, Europe. And for me, that was even more fascinating because here I'd been raising these 4 children in the US. They're boys and girls mixed 10 years apart. So on any given day, I might have 10 or 12 kids in my house of varying ages and cultural backgrounds and genders, and started to realize that the sorts of issues my kids were learning about were common to all of those American children. And then we move overseas, and now my kids have friends from all over the world. And I realize all children are learning these same lessons. This isn't an American thing. This is a human thing where we're learning how to be decent people who can cooperate and make friends and compromise. And that helped clarify my thinking. And I got the Talking with Trees series. I got that idea while we were living in China, observing all these different types of kids.
Wow, that's incredible. So we'll come back to Talking with Trees in just a minute, but I just do want to point out what I have found in my experience and my travels. What you just said is that the more I travel and the more I speak to people that travel, the more I understand the commonality of humans as humans. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and people there can sometimes be misperceived by people that just see media here. But in essence, they are people that want to have a comfortable family, a secure life. They want to be safe. They want to be happy. They want to learn, and they want to just be enjoying the life. So you had that experience firsthand where your children were immersed in that. Were there lessons that you learned there? Was there anything in particular that really struck you out from that?
Well, I completely agree with you. In our travels around the world, and we've lived and been deeply immersed in a variety of places. And my awareness of humans now is that we're all essentially trying to make a better life for ourselves and for our families. We go about it in different ways. We come into it with perhaps different priorities and cultural expectations. But at the end of the day, people are just trying to make a good life for themselves and their families. So I think that in and of itself was the key learning. Now, as a sociologist, it can be absolutely fascinating to watch the differences in how, say, Chinese people who come from a culture that's more community oriented before the individual, how they approach a problem versus Americans who it's the individual first and then the community.
Very different. How did your children react, and share with us what their ages were about at the time?
At the time we moved there, they were 3 and 7, and we were there for about
Okay.
5, 6 years. So they came back, they were in middle and elementary school. When we left, they were in preschool and elementary school.
And how did they feel about it? Were they aware of the unique opportunity they had as far as the multicultural immersion?
At the time, they did not. It was just life. It's all that they knew. And they had an incredible ability, developed, I should say, an incredible ability to adapt to any situation. And we traveled so much that wherever we were, that was home. As long as we were together, that was home. And so they could walk into new situations, new foods, new people, new dynamics, and just figure it out. So I think it was an incredible opportunity that at times they did not appreciate, especially when we first came back to America and they didn't quite realize what it was to be American and how this culture they had come from really worked. So there was an adjustment period, perhaps a little bit of discomfort at having so much moving and changing. But by the time college came around, for my daughter, who was 7 when we left, is now 20, she now realizes that the skills she learned to walk into any situation in college and internships, she can handle it.
That's incredible, and that's a gift that a lot of us have had that we didn't realize until we are able to get retrospective and look back on. I say that as the son of Army officer who moved quite a bit, and yeah, so learning to adapt was essential. So we talked about your first book, The Talking with Trees. Share a little bit more about The Talking with Trees.
So this is a series of books written for elementary age students, mostly around kindergarten to 4th grade. And it teaches lessons about honesty, respect, responsibility, caring, all through perseverance, things like that, all through these dialogues that children have with a wise old tree who's been maybe sitting on this school playground for eons, hundreds of years.
Okay.
And they've seen it before. They've seen their parents or maybe their grandparents go through the same sorts of struggles that these children are dealing with. And so through the voice of this third-party tree, it's a little more neutral. I think children are more willing to listen and be somewhat entranced by a talking tree. But then they also realize that they're not alone in this struggle that they're having, that their parents have been there. Their parents aren't the perfectly formed beings that little kids tend to think their parents are. And it helps soften a bit the fear and the self-criticism that comes with a child's growth. And it helps them see there's a path to change and to becoming someone that they will be proud of.
Well, the premise of the books is incredible, but I'm totally fascinated by your creativity in coming up with not just a tree to take out a lot of the human element that can skew messaging, but also to position it. I mean, the tree has longevity, and to be able for the tree to have seen this behavior across generations is, to me, just brilliant. Is that something that just you suddenly had an aha moment, or how did that come about?
All right, this is kind of a funny story. I was in Beijing, sitting in a park, and as you can imagine, Beijing's seen a lot of change over the past number of decades, much less centuries. and the wind was blowing. I was facing a line of trees that had been planted, I don't know, a couple decades before then. And the wind is blowing, and it's getting stronger, and it's getting stronger. And finally, I just go, oh, what do you want? And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm talking to the trees. And then I thought, how cool would that be? I mean, how amazing would that be if you could talk to these trees and they could tell you all the change that they had seen just in even recent Chinese history. And so I went home to my husband that night and I said, dear, I am going to write a book called Talking with Trees. And he said, that's great. What's it going to be about? I said, I have no idea, but I'll figure it out, because how cool would that be?
That is so cool, and the fact that you had the idea and then decided that you would figure out what it was going to be about is brilliant. I mean, it's truly brilliant. I mean, such a strong concept, and it probably opened up an entire path for you of possibility. The other thing it makes me think of, Colleen, is the phrase, if these walls could talk. Mm-hmm. Or I'd like to be a fly on the wall. You know, so getting that outside independent perspective to fill in some blanks and to tell us a story is just a really cool idea.
Well, thank you.
So kudos to you.
Thanks.
And the wind that day in Beijing.
Yes. Now, every time I see the wind, here in Oregon, we have lots and lots of big trees, and you can see the wind flowing through them. They all like move in unison. And it always reminds me of that moment. I say, oh, maybe there's something I should pay attention to here.
Well, this might be a little bit, maybe you have an answer for this, maybe it's just a wild idea on my part, but something's telling me that there has been a history of communing with nature and nature speaking to humans, like with indigenous Americans and other cultures that have listened to nature and be it the ground or the trees or the sky. Did any of that enter into your thinking, or is this just something that I've popped into my head?
Well, for me personally, I know I get a lot of inspiration and calming from nature. I always find whenever I'm feeling stressed or whenever I'm feeling stuck, if I just go sit outside in the silence and let nature happen around me, there's something clarifying about that. So I can't say that I necessarily had a conscious thought of, let me explore the way other cultures have done this. I suppose it was more organic than that I was sitting in a field that day looking for peace and clarity, and it showed up.
It's just interesting to me that, at least from my unstudied perspective, that it ties in with so much synchronicity to your sociology training and background. So what came after Talking with Trees?
So as my children entered the teen years, I recognized that the way that I spoke to them as children didn't really work anymore. They had new problems, bigger problems, more adult versions of problems. And they were in this transition stage between the dependent stage of when you're young and you're more at the mercy of other people's direction, and their growing independence, and the fact that they were more in control of the choices they made and the consequences they created. And that's kind of a difficult transition, because you're going from this point where other people control more of your life to where you have to take responsibility for what you do. There's no one else to blame but yourself. That's a scary time. It's very fresh and new for them. All these things we've done as adults over and over, and we've seen how they turn out. Teenagers haven't seen how it turns out. It's all brand new and fresh. So I came to realize I needed to adapt the lessons to a teen experience, the real life skills that they needed to prepare themselves for independent existence.
And the quotes themselves, truth be told quotes, expand on that for us, please.
So a lot of these were things my parents said to me, things like, it's not just what you say, it's also how you say it. Or just because you can doesn't mean you should. So my parents were very big on doing the right thing. So some of those came from my own experience, but others were ways that I learned to talk to my teens to help them connect their actions and their consequences. So one example would be, You're connected to a family, a community, and a world. Use your power wisely. Because teens will get into these situations where they're on their own and they are as self-absorbed as teens are. And they're not thinking about the action that they're taking is going to send ripples out through their family, through their community, through their friends. It just doesn't even necessarily occur to them. But when you clue them into that and you say, hey, this choice you're making right now, this outcome that you're creating, that could cause our family a lot of hardship. Or that outcome could affect your chance at getting into the school you want to go to or leading the life that you'd like to lead. What kind of example are you setting? What are you setting yourself up for? They start to realize that life expands beyond their little personal bubble, and they recognize more the power they have, right? Responsibility is empowerment. It means you get to control the outcomes of your life. Scary, but also a huge source of control over your own life and your sense of agency and your mental wellness.
And such a powerful lesson too. And so in total transparency, I've not yet seen, much less read the book, Truth Be Told Quotes. So just for clarification, you deliver a quote. Do you then go out and explain in more detail what the meaning of that quote is and what the impact is, the way you just did with us?
Yes, absolutely. So the book itself, one side of the page will have the quote, and it'll have some natural imagery. So again, this idea of tying into the calming, grounding effects of nature on the one side of the page. And on the other are just a couple paragraphs written in, a casual teen, a little bit silly, irreverent way about what that quote would mean in their life. But really that's supported online by resources for parents and teachers. So the book is actually all free online if you look quote by quote. If you want to give the book, let's say, as a gift to a teen, it exists in printed form. But any parent or teacher can go out, choose a quote, and then find the more full explanation from an adult perspective, discussion topics, worksheets, journaling pages, activities, all sorts of information to help make that quote actionable in a teen's life.
It sounds great. So my guest today, everyone, is Colleen Doyle Bryant, who is an expert on common decency and an author and someone who is very keen on sharing her principles and learnings with not just young people, but people of all ages. To hear what you're saying, that your resources are available pretty much anywhere, is absolutely fantastic, I think. So your books have taken a progression kind of along with the chronology of your children growing up. Is that right?
That's correct.
So is Rooted in Decency, your most recent publication, is that more adult focused or late teen focused?
That is definitely adult focused. So that comes from this idea, I would say in around 2020, I just was baffled. And I looked around at society and said, what is going on? I just people are not behaving the way that I have understood humans behave. How did this happen and how do we get out of it? And so that was definitely trying to understand adult human behavior and more of the dynamics of us as a society, both in terms of government, but also in terms of the way that people govern themselves. And our own personal behavior. How are we contributing to the current state of disrespect and dishonesty? And, who is responsible for what? And where are the lines for compassion? So it was a fascinating little down a rabbit hole sort of thing. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know what I would find, but I needed answers. And there's wonderful research out there across a range of fields, from biology, neuroscience, moral psychology, sociology, philosophy. There's so much great information, but I think today in the academic world, people tend to focus deeply within a given area. But for me, being an independent, non-academically associated person, I could look across all of those things and find where are there commonalities that give you aha moments to go, oh, if I connect this and this, look at that insight that helps me understand individuals, but also the way that individuals interact together in a society.
And that independence has, and it led you down that rabbit hole. I look very much forward to reading the book. As a matter of fact, I can tell you right now, I'm going to order 2 copies of Truth Be Told quotes for I've got twin granddaughters who are now 11, and it sounds perfect for them.
Great.
And I'm going to order Rooted in Decency for myself. So at the risk of having a spoiler alert, what's the conclusion of the book? Have you discovered a way for us to, as a society, or at least as a culture here in the States or elsewhere, I think it's global, to kind of tone down some of the, I'm going to call it rhetoric, and some of the challenges to decency?
Yeah.
Is there an answer? Is there a solution?
There is. Of course, it's not a quick solution, or I wouldn't have a book to write. So I can give you kind of a high-level bit, which is, if you look at both modern science and ancient moral philosophy, there are 4 core values that govern civil human life. And what we've found over time is that living by those values is good for you as an individual. It helps you develop yourself and your own well-being. But the same 4 values help society develop relationships based in trust and fairness and cooperation so that we can develop our well-being together. And what's interesting is that modern science now can measure ways that those ancient ideas about the way people function together, these ideas about common decency, they're actually built now into our biology. We have evolved for our bodies to give us clues that tell us when we are behaving in those ways, it feels good. And when we're not behaving these ways, it doesn't feel good. And so if we can focus a bit more back on those 4 core values, we'll develop our own sense of internal stability and worth, and we'll also improve the way that we interact with other people.
And would you expand on those 4 core qualities for us?
Yes. Okay. So the 4 qualities are, number 1 is truth. So everything starts with truth, because if you don't have an honest assessment of yourself or an honest assessment of the world around you, then you don't have the information you need to make good choices, right? Good choices depend upon good data. And if you're just believing what you want to believe because you're comfortable believing that, you're not going to have the information you need to guide yourself for your own well-being. But the other big thing about truth is that life runs on relationships, and people need to be able to trust each other. Without honesty, we can't have trust. So one thing I think is really interesting people don't maybe realize today is the extent to which trust runs society. If you were, let's say, to go right now to a coffee shop, you drive there, you go to park your car. Do people park wherever they want? No, they park in designated spots because they're cooperating and sharing a space. Then you go in the store and you hand someone money and you walk away because you have full trust that they're going to hand back that cup of coffee. And then when they hand you that cup of coffee, do you take the lid off and sniff it? And you're like, is this really coffee? No, you take a sip because you trust that they're actually giving you coffee that is not, poisoned or something other than coffee. And maybe while you were waiting in line, you chit-chatted with somebody and you had kind of this moment of shared humanity. And those sorts of interactions, those ways that we cooperate and we trust each other, they are fundamental to life. They're happening all the time. We're not paying attention to them. So without that level of trust where we know we'll wait in line together, we'll pay for our things and we'll get them back, we'll take a drink of something and it's not going to kill us. I mean, that sort of stuff is happening all the time, and it's based in a core trust that we have in other human beings.
So it's very interesting to me, just to expand on that. First of all, my reaction was not everyone parks in the designated spots, or at least correctly, but most people do, and I get your point. If I'm going to be very curious to hear, Colleen, your thoughts on how people are open to defining and understanding "quote unquote" truth, because there's so much now opinion and commentary and herd mentality on what is truth and what is not truth. How does that come into play? Because and the other thing is, there's certainly it's human nature. I think I'll defer to the sociologist here, but I think it's human nature that when we so like I said, you go to the coffee shop and not everyone parks in the right place. To me, it's somewhat human nature to see the exception to that trust that's going on all the time, rather than the fact that 98% of the people do park correctly and do let you back out and do wait for, and that type of thing. Is that true, that the negative or the exception, that the outlier resonates with humans more?
Yes, it is true. It's a psychology thing. It helps keep us alive. So if you look over our evolution, things weren't always so safe as they are now. And focusing on the negative, having those negative and outlier events stand out to us, helped keep us alive. They helped us have a warning system. But we can make this effort to switch and pay more attention to the good. And we'll see this a little bit more in some of the other values that we'll talk about, including compassion. Because we tend to focus on the negative emotions. We think about them more, we notice them more. But scientists did a study, and they found that people in the course of their daily lives had 3 times more opportunities to empathize with someone on something positive, to share positive feelings with someone, than they did the negative feelings. And so that's one of the reasons that we see, for instance, gratitude journaling or just taking the time to notice the good things is a tremendous force. It creates happiness in people because it helps them appreciate all the good that's there, that this negativity bias tends to have them not even recognize.
Okay. So let's move on to the second trait.
Okay, second trait is respect. So this starts with self-respect, which is different than self-esteem. There's an important difference. But self-respect is about recognizing that you are capable and competent, you can make choices in line with what you know is right, and that other people value you because of the way that you treat yourself and you treat them. They know that you'll treat them with fairness and care and dignity, and therefore they value you as a person. And you see the evidence of your own behavior, and you can value you as a person. So that's a lot different than the way that society today tends to look at self-esteem. And we tend to focus on these external measures where other people can praise us and give us our worth, and other people can trash us and take away our worth. But really, when you have respect, you have this body of evidence of your own behavior, and you have the fact that other people have recognized the way you treat them, and you know that you're valued in a way that's stable and can't be so, attacked or given and taken away the way people tend to look at self-esteem today.
So self-respect rather than self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming by that, Colleen, that you're saying you can have one without the other?
Well, let me explain the difference, because for a long time, the words were used interchangeably. But there were a number of studies that happened in the 1970s where psychologists concluded that people who had high self-esteem did better in life. And so throughout the 80s and the 90s, we see all these efforts by society to improve people's self-esteem, with the thinking that self-esteem causes good results. And so we see all these changes in kids' sports, for instance. Everybody gets a trophy. We see changes in schools where we don't criticize children. We only redirect them, or we only help them to feel good about themselves. And even parenting, parenting techniques change to where the focus it wasn't even just encouraging self-esteem, it became protecting children from feeling bad or uncomfortable or guilty or remorseful. And the outcome of that turned out not to be a good idea. So those same scientists went back 20 years later and said, hey, how'd that whole self-esteem thing work out? And they found out that they kind of had it backwards. It wasn't that telling people they were great, inflating their sense of themselves, even when it wasn't based in reality, that's not what caused people to do well in life. It was giving them the opportunities to do hard things, to work through those uncomfortable emotions, to learn new skills and learn their own competence. It was the actions that led to the feeling good about yourself. So that's why by I would say the late 90s or so, we start to see this shift where we realize just telling people they're great all the time isn't really helping them. It's actually making them fragile. On the other hand, when you teach kids that they have a growth mindset, that perseverance pays off, then they build for themselves a sense of their own internal worth. And that's what we're calling self-respect.
Okay. So truth, and then respect. And number 3.
Responsibility. Yeah, so responsibility, again, you've got the two sides of it. You've got the self side. So every one of the moral codes of all the world's belief systems and the Greek philosophers all say, and by the way, modern science too, if you look at happiness science and stress management science, they all say that having control over yourself, choosing to behave in a way that has a positive effect on yourself and others, that you take responsibility for your own development and you hold yourself accountable for your actions and consequences, that leads so critically to your own well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, all of it. But then responsibility also has this external factor, the way that we are responsible to other people. So do we do our duty? Well, when we do our duty, when we have duties, that means people need us. It means we have a purpose because people need us to do something to foster that relationship, to manage that give and take that's necessary and in all the relationships of our lives, whether that be our family, our friends, our co-workers, our citizens, our fellow citizens. You know, by having responsibility, we inherently have purpose because people need us. But then responsibility also has to do with this accountability. How do we manage when someone isn't living up to their responsibilities? And we get the praise for when we do well. You know, we get the reward of being responsible, but we also get the blame and the punishment when we're not responsible. And that whole act of managing ourselves and managing the give and take with other people, that's how life works. That's how civil society functions. So really, responsibility is like the glue that holds it all together.
Okay. And that leads us to the 4th trait.
All right. The 4th trait is compassion. So compassion maybe isn't quite what people think of. I think today we tend to see compassion as, well, if a little compassion is good, then a lot of compassion is even better. But the real meaning of compassion is that human to human, I can see that you're suffering and I'm prompted to act. But that doesn't mean that act is just to relieve your suffering. The act is to say, what's the right thing to do in this situation? Because sometimes to be responsible, I can't remove your suffering. Or sometimes to be responsible, I have to balance the situation you're in with the situation I would create for other people by solving your problem. So the real meaning of compassion is that we see each other human to human and we want to help each other. But we also work to act responsibly and balance the needs of lots of people who have suffering. So compassion, one, it helps us negotiate those hard times. It helps us negotiate those difficult trade-offs. But it also helps us take joy with each other. This idea that we have 3 times more opportunities to feel positive emotions with someone than negative Compassion is part of that. Let's enjoy life together and share in each other's joys. If you take joy in other people's joy, you get infinite joy, as opposed to just focusing on the good of your own life.
Okay, so you clarified a moment ago about self-respect versus self-esteem. Help me understand how compassion and empathy go together or don't go together. How do they complement each other?
Oh, that is a great question, because empathy is when you feel someone's emotions along with them. And empathy depends upon your ability to relate to somebody else. So empathy's got a couple drawbacks. On the one hand, empathy is great. With the people who you are close to, who you can relate to, who you can understand, it can be a strong force to comfort and support and to help. But empathy kind of falls a little short sometimes, because let's say you don't understand someone, you don't relate to them, or you don't know why they would make the choices they made. Or even, there are times people make choices and they feel bad because they've put themselves in that situation. They've made a bad choice and they're suffering the consequences of that choice. Well, why do I need to feel your emotions along with you when I made choices so I don't have to feel that way? So empathy, especially with people that you're not close to and connected with, it has its limits. We also see with empathy that people can get empathy fatigue, like we saw during COVID with nurses. To constantly be around other people suffering and to feel it along with them can be draining. It can get people to a point where they just need to withdraw and push away and like, I can't help you anymore. It's too much. So empathy, helpful for understanding other perspectives and relating to people, but limited. Compassion, on the other hand, compassion is a human-to-human connection. It's like, it doesn't matter who you are and where you come from and whether I agree with you, the human in me sees the human in you. And I know that I'm as vulnerable in this life as you are. And so based on that sheer human connection, I can see that you're going through something hard. And just that acknowledgement of our shared humanity, and that whether I agree with you or not, this is hard for you, I get it. That's a really powerful thing. But where compassion also differs from empathy is that I don't need to relieve my own pain right now. I'm not motivated by my own emotions or my own concerns. I'm motivated by that human-to-human connection. So on a human level, what's the right thing to do here? How do I balance my compassion for you in this situation with the other responsibilities that we have as humans who live together with competing demands?
So let me, I don't want to say play devil's advocate, but for the sake of me understanding more, and hopefully the listeners as well, a very top line thought that I just had when you were giving your difference between empathy and compassion is, to me, my mind said empathy goes a step beyond compassion, in that we're trying to say, okay, I can see you're hurting and we're all hurting, and I'm trying to at least be aware of what it is that is hurting in you. I don't have to understand it. I don't have to agree with it, but I can kind of understand. So empathy towards a nurse in those situations would be, man, I can see how frustrated you are, and I can't fix it, but I'm empathetic enough to feel what you're feeling, that, yeah, this can get old fast. And compassion would be like a step short of that, where it's, yeah, I see you're having a hard time, and we all have hard times. And does that make any sense?
Well, the main difference between empathy and compassion is that when you empathize with someone, you are physically feeling emotions with that person. So there's a greater connection, and there becomes a bit of a blending happening there. So let's use a teenager as an example. Let's say your teenager didn't do their homework. And so you said, if you don't do your homework, you can't go out Saturday night. And now it's Saturday night, and they're mopey and they're sad and they really want to go out. And you're a parent. You feel your kids' emotions with them, and you go, oh man, they're suffering. I could relieve this suffering. oh, I feel so bad that they feel so bad, right? But the fact is, you're feeling that emotion with them. It can be harder to make an objective choice when you're feeling someone's emotion with them. Because one, you're feeling it too, and you would like to relieve your pain as well. But when you're coming from a place of compassion, you're saying, all right, my teen, I love you, and my job is to help you grow into a responsible adult. So even though I have compassion for the fact that you feel bad right now, I'm gonna keep enough objectivity that I do what's responsible and right in the long term, which is not to let you out of the punishment, because the punishment is teaching you a lesson. Does that make more sense? It's kind of an objectivity versus feeling something with someone. Empathy, you feel with someone. Compassion, you acknowledge, but you recognize a responsibility to do what is right for the long term.
I think I understand better. I will tell you that it's given me food for thought and gives me something to do after our conversation to get deeper into this because, yes, it makes some sense to me, but I don't have total clarity and I like getting total clarity when I can. And I think that's something that I certainly can. So we're in respect for the time allotment that I asked of you, and thank you so much for your gift of time, much less your experience and your knowledge and your insights. I do want to talk just a little bit about the how your materials are used as teaching resources, and we talked early in the show about they've been downloaded well over 100,000 times. How does that work? Do people counsel with you, or is it just here's the materials, take them and use them?
Well, for teachers, so a lot of my materials are used by teachers, and the way that teachers tend to create their lesson plans is they have an idea of what they want to teach, and then they go out and they look for worksheets or lesson plans that talk about objectives step by step, and here connecting resources. So they'll go to my website and they'll say, let's say I need a lesson about honesty. They can go search by value, look up, okay, what's available for me to teach about honesty? And they'll find something that aligns with the sort of message they're coming across, they're trying to convey. We also have, for instance, something more generic, like some of our most popular pages are what is respect or what is honesty, where people know that they need to convey some idea that's hard to explain. How do you explain respect to a child? So we'll have these more simplified definitions that then link to books or worksheets or coloring pages or posters, all these different resources that they can customize based on how they want to teach that lesson, what the age group is they're trying to teach to, or if they're tying it in with other character education type exercises.
Fascinating. So, listeners, if you want to learn more about Colleen and her work, your website is?
If you go to ColleenDoyleBryant.com, you'll find links to both Talking with Trees, Truth Be Told, and Rooted in Decency, as well as various blogs that, blogs and resources and all sorts of stuff that'll help you on whichever age level of values exploration you're looking for.
Okay. And all of that will be in the show notes, as always. So just a real brief recap. You found it to be your purpose to pursue trying to increase common decency in humanity, and that obviously has ignited a passion within you. And yeah, I'm going through my own purpose principle here. The purpose ignites your passion, and doing it for well over 2 decades, you certainly have had the persistence. So that kind of summarizes why you are an ideal guest for my show. Thank you again. But when all is said and done, everything we've talked about, as you look at this, here's the question all of my guests get asked. What's the point, Colleen?
What's the point for me or for people in general?
You get to answer it however you'd like.
Great.
You can answer both ways.
What I would love to share with people, and you can get a better understanding of this through Rooted in Decency, is that the way life works is through relationships, right? Just even that coffee shop example, there's very little that happens in our life that is exclusive to us, where we're not interacting in some way or impacting other people. And there's a great symbolism for this in ancient moral philosophy, which is human individuals are kind of in a bubble in the middle where their needs and wants are most important, but they're surrounded by concentric circles that grow outward based on the closeness of the relationship. So let's say you're in this middle bubble, and right outside that is a bubble with your family and your close friends. And there are roles that you play in those relationships. Maybe you're someone's mother, maybe you're someone's child, maybe you're someone's best friend, someone's aunt. Then there's another concentric circle that's a little bit further out, and that's maybe your colleagues, your neighbors, your community. And maybe there you're playing roles like a boss or a colleague or an activist. And then the next concentric circle is you as a citizen within a nation. And then there's you as a human being within all of humanity. And when people talk about finding their purpose, what's the point of existence? These days, based on how individual we are and how global life is, how much we're informed about what's going on in the world, when you ask people, what's your purpose? They seem to think about those rings that are way far out, those how am I impacting humanity sorts of purposes. But really in life, every moment of every day, you're impacting people in those rings that are closer in, the rings with family and friends and coworkers and community. And every action you take sends ripples out from your little bubble in the middle out into those rings. And those rings send ripples back into you. And throughout the course of human history, it's been those relationships, it's been those ways that we create positive impact as a mother, as a child, as a neighbor, as a friend, as a coworker. The ways we create a positive impact beyond ourselves in those closest rings have been the point of existence for people. They have brought meaning and purpose because they're evidence in everyday life of the way that you're generating your own self-respect, you're treating other people with respect, and you're laying down all this evidence of the good that you're doing in the world. Now, if some of those ripples make it all the way out to your nation and humanity, great. That's fantastic. But the only way you're getting there is through all the ripples on all the closer rings on your way out to those far rings.
Well, that's incredibly insightful. I love it. And just a quick reminder of the four traits that help all of that happen in a good way are truth, respect, responsibility, and compassion, right?
That's right.
Colleen Doyle Bryant, thank you so much again for your time, for your insights. Everyone, go buy her books for you, for your children, for your grandchildren, for your neighbors, for however far out in those concentric circles you would like to give this gift of human and common decency. Colleen, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.